So, what ever happened to that classic Irwin Allen sci-fi television series, The Time Tunnel? Let's find out.
Movies, music, and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Oh man, this was definitely one of my favorites. The Time Tunnel, which was Irwin Allen's third sci-fi television series, was released by 20th Century Fox and broadcast on ABC. Unfortunately, and like a lot of other TV shows back in the day, The Time Tunnel sadly only got one season of 30 episodes from 1966 until 1967. In fact, The Time Tunnel was the shortest of all the Irwin Allen science fiction TV shows. But man, this show was great when it lasted. Two American scientists are lost in the swirling maze of past and future ages during the first experiments on America's greatest and most secret project, the Time Tunnel. Tony Newman and Doug Phillips now tumble helplessly towards a new fantastic adventure somewhere along the infinite corridors of time. The premise of the show was basically pretty simple. Initially, Project TikTok, which had enormous government funding, is on the possible chopping block unless somebody is sent through time and back, or funding is cut off. And of course they do, which launches the series into the vast knowns and unknowns of time and cementing the Time Tunnel as one of the coolest and most memorable TV shows from the 1960s. But why didn't it last? Well, we'll get to that. Douglas Phillips and Anthony Newman, played by Robert Colbert and James Darren, become active participants in such amazing historical events as the sinking of the Titanic, the attack on Pearl Harbor, Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of the Alamo, and so many more. We could be here all day.
When you enter the Time Tunnel, almost anything can happen. Stop! The Time Tunnel, in color on ABC.
The series also starred Whit Bissell as General Haywood Kirk and former Miss America and Catwoman Lee Merriweather as Dr. Anne McGregor.
What went on in the Time Tunnel itself, we saw images of our two compatriots in trouble and in dire straits throughout the entire series. But we never saw that footage. If we were lucky, the director had filmed some of it ahead of time, so he was able to tell us, yes, now Doug is just about to step on the landmine. Just about, but not quite.
Okay, so according to the plot, the time travel is deemed possible by time being portrayed as a static continuum, accessible at any point through the time tunnel corridor spanning its infinite reaches. Meaning, basically, Doug and Tony eventually figure out that events of the past can literally be altered. And, to some extent, occasionally, they do attempt to alter history itself. Come on, man, haven't these guys ever heard of the Prime Directive? Okay, never mind. Different show.
Irwin would go to any length to make it look exactly like what the storyboard was. So when I saw what Irwin had storyboarded, and then eventually saw this incredible set, which was exactly like the storyboard, but grand, of course, it was breathtaking. It helped you in your character. You fantasized and you were there.
The initial concept or premise of the show was certainly interesting for the 1960s, although not completely original. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but in the 1950s, there was a kind of goofy series called Captain Zero, Z/RO, that basically had the exact same storyline, advanced Earth technology using a time machine to go back in history and manipulate the outcome for the benefit of mankind. Coincidence? I don't know. Lines are open. You decide. The production of the Time Tunnel used a ton of sets, stock footage, and leftover props from other 20th Century Fox movies and TV shows, including Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Land of the Giants, and yes, even Batman. In fact, Irwin Allen's insistence on the use of old stock footage really not only brought the past alive each week to some extent, but also saved a ton of money on the show's budget. And if there's one thing that Irwin Allen knew how to do really well, it was save money. Now, believe it or not, and really unlike most every other TV show ever made, only one set was constructed for the entire run of the show. The Time Tunnel set, which was created for the pilot episode, basically just a large control room, and the long time tunnel itself was created using optical matting shots.
I think it was a 6-day shoot on the show, and usually 1 day was for the tunnel and 5 days were for the exteriors. We didn't have time to think ahead. Thank God Irwin did, because with about 3 shows at one time going, the man was a genius, and he hired good people around him. And when you're there from 7 in the morning until maybe 8, 9 at night, on any good day, 14-hour day was nothing.
This is also really uncommon for TV shows. Only a few actors for each episode were actually put into any kind of a costume. The director of that particular episode simply looked at whatever stock footage they were going to use for that show and then would dress the actors in those kind of costumes to make the footage fit in a little more seamlessly. This is kind of interesting. The main time tunnel set that they created for the pilot episode was really enormous. But when the show went to series, filming locations were changed and the time tunnel itself was moved into a smaller control room set on a smaller soundstage. As far as the primary actors, Colbert and Darren, they shot most all their stuff on the 20th Century Fox backlot or occasionally on location in and around Southern California. And if you pay really close attention, pretty much all the scenes set in different parts of the world or country have the same general hilly landscape in the background. Another very effective cost-cutting measure. This is fascinating, and I never knew this, but apparently in interviews, Irwin Allen always claimed that this show, The Time Tunnel, was his personal favorite out of all the shows he ever did. I mean, it was good, but the best? Probably because it was the cheapest one to produce. And like Lost in Space, each episode ended with a cliffhanger to the next week's episode. And I suppose it's kind of ironic that the final episode in the series had a cliffhanger to a repeat of the very first episode. Kinda cool. One big circle in time. Initially, the show was previewed for fans along with Star Trek at the 1966 World Science Fiction Convention in Cleveland, which was actually ahead of the television premiere. The amazing theme music for the opening and closing credits were once again composed by the legendary John Williams, or Johnny Williams as he was known back in the day. The Time Tunnel even won an Emmy Award in 1967 for individual achievements in cinematography, with the award going to L.B. Abbott for his amazing photographic special effects. The overall ratings for the Time Tunnel were really, quite frankly, outstanding. Audiences just loved tuning in week after week to see where and when these two time travelers were going to end up. So why did it get canceled? Why did it only get 30 episodes? Well, 2 reasons actually. The first was that ABC did actually offer to renew the series, but only if Irwin Allen agreed to cut the budget by 1/3, which he absolutely refused to do. Secondly, the time tunnel was scheduled on Fridays, which was often considered the Friday night death slot for any TV program. Why they put the time tunnel in this spot is absolutely beyond me. I mean, who the heck is home on a Friday night? And even though the time tunnel was one of the very few shows that succeeded in this terrible time slot, the network executives wanted a new series called The Legend of Custer, which, quite frankly, I've never heard of, to replace the time tunnel. Like, permanently. Why? God, network executives. Well, The Legend of Custer was eventually greenlit, and that meant the time tunnel was canceled. Just like that. What a shame. The ratings were great, and the people liked it. But, as karma would have it, Custer was almost immediately canceled after only 17 shows for its extremely low ratings. Take that, network executives. Well, the time tunnel came and the time tunnel went, but that certainly wasn't the end of this extraordinary TV series. In January 1967, a promotional novel simply called The Time Tunnel was published by Pyramid Books. Later that year, another novel called Time Slip, Time Tunnel Adventure Number 2 was also released. There were also 2 comic book issues put out by Gold Key Comics in 1966 and 1967. 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment finally released the entire series on DVD in 2006, including full-length, uncut, and unedited original network prints, except for one episode. For some reason, the episode Chased Through Time remained edited. Why? No idea, but if you know, let me know. And then eventually Revelation Films released the entire series in glorious Blu-ray quality in 2018. And what about the toys? Every Irwin Allen show always had a whole bunch of really cool toys. Well, the Time Tunnel did, sort of. There was a board game by Ideal Toys, which was released in 1966, and a second board game called The Time Tunnel Spin to Win in 1967. Bally Manufacturing actually created a pinball game called The Time Tunnel in 1971. There were also coloring books, Viewmaster sets, but sadly no metal lunchbox. Similar to the Planet of the Apes live-action TV series in 1980, 5 feature-length television films were assembled from 10 Time Tunnel episodes, with portions of the first episode used as introductory material. Okay, but whatever happened to the spin-offs, remakes, and God help us, reimaginings? Well, believe it or not, 3 different attempts were made to resurrect the time tunnel over the years, and not a single one of them ever made it. Way back in 1976, Irwin Allen himself developed the idea of a film or a new pilot for a remake of the 1960s time tunnel. I'm really not sure why, but from what I've heard, it had to do with some type of litigation issue, but the pilot didn't sell and then was later repackaged as a standalone television film. And that's strike number 1. Then, in 2002, 20th Century Fox once again showed some interest in rebooting this series. This particular pilot was spearheaded by executive producer Kevin Burns, which apparently had a much darker and more serious tone than the original 1966 series. I'm assuming similar to what he did with the new Lost in Space. But the series wasn't picked up by Fox because Fox decided to go with this other little show called Firefly. And yeah, Firefly was a really good show. Apparently, this particular pilot was eventually released on DVD in 2006, simply called The Time Tunnel, but as far as a new series goes, that's strike number 2. Then, in 2005, the Sci-Fi Channel announced the intention to create a new time tunnel pilot for its 2006 season. Once again, Kevin Burns, along with Irwin Allen's wife Sheila, began work on the new show, but sadly, the series never got any further than just a script for the pilot. And that, my friends, is strike number 3. And you know what? In a way, I'm not really disappointed. The show was great. We got one season of 30 episodes. Sometimes it's okay to just leave things alone. I mean, considering all we ever seem to get these days are reboots, reimaginings, and remakes, it's kind of nice to know that something that was great back in the day still remains untouched. I don't know, just my opinion. Now, despite the short run of the time tunnel with only 30 episodes, the show remains a sci-fi classic fan favorite to this day, and certainly, in my opinion, enters the Irwin Allen Hall of Fame right up there with another one of my all-time favorite Irwin Allen classic television shows, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. But that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive into the time tunnel, and if you did, and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole ton of new videos coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig. As always, if anybody has any questions, drop them down in the comments and I will try my best to answer them for you. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.